First of all, pleasure to be here. It's always a tough act to follow. We have an overly sociable tech lead, but I'll try my best as the business guy to not be outshone too much. So Emanuele talked about most of this, right? So Dusk is a compliant privacy blockchain with a very strong focus on STOs. The big goal is to remove the middlemen from regulated markets without losing regulatory approval, and we use things like zero-knowledge cryptography to combine compliance and confidentiality on-chain, leading to the use cases just described. But I'd like to take a few minutes to dive a little bit deeper into that security token space. So what does that look like? What's the reasoning behind it? Why is this the trillion-dollar market? So we start at the beginning, right? A security token is basically, or a security I should say, is anything of value. So it could be a bond or a stock or a deed in a building or you name it. But the easiest example is probably a share in a company. So when we look at shares in companies, right, there's a few main drivers, and this kind of moves us a little bit out of the blockchain space and sadly a little bit more into the real world. In the real world, a company might emit shares, for example, because they want to raise funds, and they do this to grow and to invest and all these kind of normal motivations. And an investor might buy shares because they think they can make money off of them, or they want voting rights or kind of certain skin in the game in a particular enterprise. So why is this worth tokenizing? First of all, security token is a very interesting application of blockchain for a company because as opposed to previous blockchain applications, they can now only decentralize a small part of their business. So if you are a bakery or a shoe shop or a different type of kind of medium-sized enterprise, you don't want to decentralize your actual business, right? Like shoes have probably very little to do on a blockchain, but you might want to, for example, decentralize your shares or your share registry or your governance or your dividends and get the benefits from blockchain here, whilst otherwise running your business exactly the same way that you have always done. A second big thing is that blockchain, and in this case Dusk, by taking out the middleman, they can not only bring the costs down of emitting a security, they can also vastly decrease your time to market. This means you get a lower barrier of entry, ultimately giving access to these type of fundraising methods to a whole new company sector that previously could only access the IPO, for example, something obviously way too lengthy and way too expensive for your typical SME to achieve. And why are they relevant for you? Well, obviously people invest to make money. You're opening up a whole new asset class that was previously either unattainable or locked up in private equity. And when we talk about private equity, you basically buy a share in a company, for example, and you need to hold it for 7 years or 10 years. And if you want to get rid of it, you need to really find someone that wants to buy it from you. You go to a notary, and it's quite a painful process. However, if you tokenize this, you can encode things like token trade restrictions and KYC AML on a token level. You've now created a liquid secondary market. Now that by itself is already pretty cool, but the big kicker is that this will vastly increase the risk tolerance that people have. Because if you can exit a position, and you don't have to wait 10 years to do this, then you'll allow for a little bit more risk. So that means that a lot more types of propositions become viable because you can now trade these things. It's basically a game changer for the SME segment. But there's a few things required here, and I'll only spend a very brief moment on it. So obviously the confidentiality that Emanuele described very well is required in the secondary market. So you want to be able to do your trades confidentially. You know, you see if a big asset movement happens, someone moves $10 million of Bitcoin, you know, people freak out and the price starts dumping and it spirals down and there's panic in the market. And in a mature regulated market, this doesn't really have a place, right? You need to be able to move positions without destroying your own value or destroying the value of a company. And you obviously need to be compliant. And it's really the reconciliation of these two that models a blockchain for real world adoption. So if you want mass adoption with both the regulators and the users happy, you need to create a workable marriage between both of their requirements and not just build something that is convenient, but build something that solves a certain pain. So why hasn't it happened yet, right? So we've been talking about security tokens for probably a year. And we've been promised the world, and we might be seeing the first few pop up now, but it sure took its sweet time. And there's a reason for that, why 2018 was not the year of the security token. So first of all, existing solutions ignore the privacy requirements, right? And we've spent enough time on this, but they build it on a fully open ledger, which hampers business adoption. They're often centralized, resorting to off-chain middlemen again. So what we're doing at Dusk is bringing everything on-chain. So this means that if you've passed a certain pre-approval process, you're then free to do whatever you want. Whereas in a off-chain solution, if I now want to, I don't know, send you a security token, then someone else has to come in to say, yes, you're allowed to do so, right? And that doesn't only hurt scalability, it also hurts general adoption and, for example, the potential for decentralized exchanges. And many platforms and incubators tend to overcharge and deliver too little. So there's plenty of platforms that are kind of glorified legal studios or just reintroduce new types of middlemen into the scene, charging a lot of your equity, charging a huge setup fee, mediation fee. There's a reason for this, because they're usually application level players built on top of other blockchains, so they're for-profit companies. This is really one of the big drivers why we wanted to create Dusk, because anyone savvy enough to adopt our token standard, so the XST standard, confidential security token, is positioned to become for security token offerings what, for example, ERC20 was for ICOs. And well, we all know intuitively that we don't need to go to Ethereum in order to create an ERC20, right? But counterintuitively, this is exactly the case with many of today's STO solutions, and this is exactly what we want to solve. So I mentioned a few of these things kind of along the way already. So we solved the framework on-chain. This makes it cheaper and vastly more scalable. The time to market is reduced, and it allows for a much cleaner introduction of your token into a liquid secondary market. It scales well, and as we've mentioned many times already, it meets the real-world requirements of confidentiality and compliance. So what does an STO potentially look like, right? So with all these things, there's no real silver bullet, right? There's still a little bit of work you need to do, but you're vastly decreasing this timeline and vastly bringing down the cost. At a very high level, we think most STOs will go through roughly these steps. On the analysis side, you might think about things like which jurisdiction do we want to issue a security token from? So do I want to do it from my home jurisdiction? Do I want to do it maybe from a regulator-friendly jurisdiction, for example, in Malta, or well, you know the names, right? And what kind of legal work do I need to do? Like, do I want to offer it to the public or only to accredited investors? Are we talking equity or maybe a real estate fund? And these are some of the decisions you make early. And there's still some real-world legal work that needs to be done there, right? There's no way around it. But then it starts getting interesting, because then we start going into the technical space. And using the XST standard, for example, you can now capture all of these parameters, like your token trade restrictions. So everyone needs to be 18 plus, or from a certain country, or have passed steps A, B, and C. You can capture it in the token. So once you've created this token with everything encoded on the token level, well, you proceed to your fundraising, which you can do in Dusk, for example. You successfully close it, and you now issue this security token, which is liquid, can go onto many of the traditional exchanges, but also allows for a crypto exchange, like a decentralized exchange, or even a centralized exchange that has the correct license. Well, and the benefits we've talked about, right? You've seen the first two a dozen times, but the big benefit for a business, they're not gonna care about us using bulletproof or something fancy. They want to know, is it faster, is it cheaper, or does it allow me to do something that I previously was unable to do? And that's really the big benefit area. Right, so our go-to-market. Emanuele talked about the stop part, right? So technically, it's a logical progression. So I can send something from A to B, I can exchange something with B, or we can exchange something and we don't know when it's going to end. But on the business side, there's a similar ecosystem. So Dusk is really becoming a protocol player, right? We want to be that foundational layer that others build on top of. So this could be a third-party provider that wants to be an STO platform on top of Dusk, or it could be a third party that wants to directly issue a security token on top of Dusk, and then we enter into the secondary market that I mentioned. So exchanges, liquidity, you name it. We, at the Dusk Foundation, that's the entity overseeing the development and the adoption of Dusk Network, are in a European consortium with many of the required kind of regulator and business partners that we need to kind of make a zero knowledge compliance paradigm become something that is commonly accepted, whereas now you're still looking to potentially more crypto-friendly legislations. So I'll only spend a few seconds on the team. So basically what it boils down to is we're not neglecting the business side or the tech side. It's a well-balanced team. I'm still missing a few names. Emanuele talked about himself. We have Dimitri on board. He created Equihash, the hashing algorithm for Zcash. With the Grul and Kev, they came over from Neo Research, City of Zion. I'm the cheeky guy in the bottom there. Basically, a whole lot of great people. If you go to on our Telegram, you'll probably see Mel's most of the time. He leads much of our marketing campaign. Basically, ambitious project, obviously, but we think we have the right people on board, and this translates also into our partnerships, our advisory space. So you've all seen Alan. He's been our gracious host tonight. But when you look at some of our other advisors, it's not just empty names, right? We have people that are relevant for payment adoption. We have people that are relevant in the IPO and in the STO space. And we have people that are highly experienced in an incubation process, like Mark, for example, from Startup Bootcamp. When you look at our partnerships, there's two, I guess, worth highlighting. So Emanuele already mentioned Bitfinex. So they're not only taking care of our listing, right, but we're also exploring strategically what the future of exchanges in crypto land might look like. And Switch.io, probably one of the most well-known decentralized exchanges, which are also greedily looking at a STO future and heavily exploring Dusk as a foundation. So brief summary, Dusk, compliant privacy blockchain, big focus on STOs, it's on-chain, well, you can read the bullet points, right? As already mentioned by Emanuele, we have a little bit of public allocation left on the Bitfinex platform, but otherwise you'll find us on Bitfinex mid-December. Thank you very much.